Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Ann Cotton, Director of the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this forum for the general election forum for the office of governor. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Maryland, the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore, Maryland Nonprofits, Maryland Reporter, Maryland Matters, and Maryland Latinos Unidos. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League's mission is to empower voters and protect democracy. To learn more about the upcoming election, the candidates, and the offices they're seeking, go to vote411.org. The Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore is a nonpartisan applied research and service organization that leverages the expertise of the university community to inform decision makers through applied research and program evaluation, develop public servants through its professional development programs, promote public discourse through policy analysis and conferences, and grow future leaders through fellowships and applied learning activities for students. Maryland Nonprofits is a statewide association of more than 1,400 nonprofit organizations and institutions with members in every county. Their mission is to strengthen organizations and networks for greater quality of life and equity. This year, they're celebrating their 30th anniversary, and Maryland Nonprofits is home to the Standards of Excellence Institute. MarylandReporter.com is the original nonprofit news website covering state government and politics in Maryland. Founded in 2019 and recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 tax-exempt corporation, MarylandReporter.com does original coverage and also produces a daily roundup of coverage of government and politics from news sites and bloggers across Maryland. Foundations help start Maryland Reporter, and it's supported by private donors, foundations, and sponsors. Maryland Matters is a nonprofit news website focused on state government and politics. Launched in 2017 as a blog, Maryland Matters began publishing a daily news report in 2018. Maryland Matters now has more reporters covering the State House than the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post combined. Their funding comes from reader donations and foundation grants. Maryland Latinos Unidos, or MLU, is a statewide network that collaborates and builds collective power for the benefit of Maryland's Latino community and immigrant communities. MLU members are organizations, businesses, and individuals who support Latino and immigrant communities across Maryland. MLU addresses the challenges faced by emerging communities, provides technical assistance for community organizations, and builds links to all levels of government and advances knowledge of the Latino community through research and outreach. Just a reminder, this forum is being recorded and will be available at the University of Baltimore College of Public Affairs YouTube site by early next week. It'll also be shared on host sites, the sponsors' host sites. Past forums, in addition to tonight's events, we also hosted forums for candidates for the Office of Comptroller on October the 6th and conducted interviews with candidates for the Office of Attorney General. Recordings of these events are also posted on the University of Baltimore College of Public Affairs YouTube channel. The sponsors encourage everyone who's eligible to vote. You can learn more about the upcoming election, the candidates and offices, as well as get important information about local ballot questions and statewide ballot questions by going to vote411.org. Just a reminder about important deadlines for voting. Early voting begins on Thursday, October the 27th, and goes through November the 3rd. The general election is on November the 8th. Requests for mail-in ballots must be received by November the 1st, and mail-in ballots must be postmarked or placed in a designated ballot box by 8 p.m. on November the 8th. The deadline to register to vote online is October the 18th, and the deadline for in-person voting registration is November the 8th. This is same-day voter registration. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderators for this evening, Josh Kurtz, founding editor of Maryland Matters, and Len Lazark, founding editor and publisher of Maryland Reporter. Now I'll turn it over to Josh and Len.
Good evening, folks. Tonight we have 4 of the 5 candidates for governor who are on the ballot. The order in which they will speak was determined by a drawing just before we began. And the four candidates we have tonight are Dan Cox, the nominee of the Republican Party, David Lashar, the nominee of the Libertarian Party, David Harding, the nominee of the Working Class Party, and Nancy Wallace, the nominee of the Green Party. So, and I will now hand it off to Josh, who will explain some of the ground rules. The questions were determined by a committee that included Josh and me and two of the League of Women Voters folks who put this on.
Well, right. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for being here, and thanks especially to the candidates for joining us. So we'll begin with opening statements. Each of the candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, and then we'll just jump into the questions. The candidates will each have 2 minutes to answer a question. We'll let each of the candidates answer the question. If someone is interested in offering a rebuttal, they'll have 30 seconds for the rebuttal. And then when it gets toward the end, and remember, we're going to about 8:30, the candidates will have 2 minutes for closing statements. There will be a timekeeper. The candidates have already seen the practice run of this, but there will be a clock on everybody's screen that will show the countdown. When there are 15 seconds left, the screen will turn yellow. When the time is up, there'll be a red sign and an encouragement to stop. We'll let the candidate finish a sentence then, but we really do need to stick to the 2-minute answers. And so with that, I think I'm turning it back to Len to introduce the candidates for their opening statements.
Okay, we will do it in the order that they were introduced. So first we go to Mr. Cox for your opening statement.
Well, good evening, Maryland, and good evening to the League of Women Voters of Maryland and to the sponsors. Anne, thank you for hosting, as well as Nancy and everyone here that's serving. It's an honor to speak with you this evening. I am State Delegate Dan Cox, serving in the Maryland House of Delegates and running for governor. And I'm asking for your vote humbly. I'm a father of 10 children with my lovely bride of 26 years. We've lived here in Maryland all our lives. My wife is from the Eastern Shore. I was born and raised here in Maryland, actually born in DC, but raised, started in Tacoma Park, and then lived all my life here in Maryland. I'm a lifetime Marylander, one of the only lifetime Marylanders leading on the ballot. And so I am running because we believe in the future of Maryland. We want to make sure that, as Governor Hogan has done, that the taxes are held back and that we instead push forward, as I have worked in the legislature by Governor Hogan's side, for senior tax relief. We passed that this past session and worked very hard, but it was just a start. I want to continue that also for our first responders. I want to make sure that our state is safe again. We talked about this all through the campaign, because every time I go to Baltimore City, it breaks my heart to see what so many have to go through. That's unequal justice. I want to bring equal justice under law for the entire state, to end the daily murders and to get the illegal guns off of the Baltimore streets and make sure that we have the police funded. And thirdly, I want to make sure that not only do we have our freedom, but our education system working, and that includes for our grandchildren and children. We have a desperate need to make sure that our education system works, and I intend to end the gender indoctrination. My opponent, he stands against the police and defunding it in the 2020 Salon.com review, and he also has spoken up very firmly against or for gender indoctrination as part of his website plan. So my plan is different. I ask humbly for your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Lashar.
Thank you. I'm David Lashar, your Libertarian option for Maryland governor. And I'm running for office because I believe that our American experiment in democracy is in dire jeopardy. And the reason for this jeopardy is not what the two big parties are telling us. The reason for the jeopardy is the two big parties themselves. They are at holy war with one another. They are bringing us divisive politics. They are bringing us dysfunctional policies. We saw some of this last night in the debate on MPT and WBAL with the bickering and the evasions that we need to get away from. So along with my running mate, Christiana Logan-Smith, I am standing as a principled, accomplished, and civil alternative. I am an IT executive with experience in federal and state government. I live in Annapolis with my wife and my teenage daughter. My wife has spent her career in environmental protection and natural resources. Christiana and I, we're bringing forward a program of expanding opportunity for all, obtaining accountability from all, especially our officials and elites, and extending civility towards all. I'm pleased to be here this evening with all of the three of the five of your options for Maryland governor. And I look forward to the discussion to come. Thank you very much.
Mr. Harding.
Good evening. I'm Dave Harding, the Working Class Party candidate for governor of Maryland. My running mate is Kathy White for lieutenant governor. I have lived and worked in Baltimore for many decades as a steel worker, shipyard worker, and now in data processing for the Maryland Department of Health. I have been active in 2 unions. The working class needs its own political party. We are living in an economic system that has created crushing inflation, and at the same time, does not create anywhere near enough decent paying jobs. It is a system that allowed COVID to kill over 1 million people in this country, and it killed over 15,000 Marylanders. Public health should have been able to prevent this catastrophe, but instead, for many decades, the money did not go for what we need, like healthcare, infrastructure, and other public services. The money, our taxes, went to private interests, corporations, banks, speculators, and developers, expanding their profits at our expense. We need wages to be increased now. We need wages to keep pace with inflation, and we need decent paying jobs. Because of the essential role that workers play in the economy, that is, we make everything run and we know how everything works. We have the power to change things, but only if we stand together as one class against the tax on immigrants, the violence and indignities of racism, as well as attacks on women's rights. All of us together, organized together. The working class needs its own party. To do that, the power it has can be realized. If you agree, you should vote for the Working Class Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And last we have Nancy Wallace.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation and the huge organizing work for this major event by all the sponsors, and especially to the League of Women Voters, which has a tradition of many decades for open egalitarian debates, including us, the post-Civil War parties, I would say, in contrast to Maryland Public Television last night, which excluded 3 of the 5 candidates, which will be on your ballot. I'm Nancy Wallace, representing the Greens of Maryland. I grew up and live in Bethesda, and I'm 66 years old. I have a degree in political science from Yale University with a minor in developing revolutionary movements, learning how nations evolved politically after becoming independent of colonial empires. And there are some interesting parallels there with some of our struggles in Baltimore and throughout the state in terms of the colonialism of slavery and our continuing wrestling with the legacy. I became a representative of the National Environmental Movement on Capitol Hill as a registered lobbyist for 14 years. I've worked directly on national legislation, appropriations, the federal budget, conference reconciliations, and built 2 national grassroots networks to bring about our funding goals. In my last position, I represented the Sierra Club for 5 years and won $500 million for women's reproductive health care and survival in developing countries. Since then, I've worked for 30 years on the executive side of the federal government, doing information technology and program improvement for Department of Defense, Treasury, Homeland Security, and Commerce, currently as a contractor. I've been co-chair of the Montgomery County Greens for 8 years, and my full bio is on the website, wallaceforgovernor.us, because this is a team sport. It's not about a governor telling other people what to do. In my private life, I've mentored 3 children of one disadvantaged Black family in downtown DC for 25 years. They took me on a journey to the underside of American society, and we must fight this systemic racism and sexism that we have today. All this needs to happen in the context of the huge emergency climate change fight that we have to implement all of these programs together. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I get to ask the first question, and we will alternate back and forth, Josh and me, and then Josh will close out the session around 8:30 or so. This is a real softball, and we will start with Mr. Lashar, and then go to Mr. Harding, Ms. Wallace, and then end up with Mr. Cox. So this is a softball. Mr. Lashar, what makes you qualified to be governor?
What makes me qualified is that I uniquely bring experience and accomplishment from both the private sector and public service. The public service, I served in the Hogan administration before leaving the Republican Party and becoming a Libertarian. I served as the #2 person leading technology and operations from 2016 into 2018. In that role, I not only managed the largest, most complicated agency in the state enterprise, but I had achievements like the Justice Reinvestment Act. The Justice Reinvestment Act, for those who don't know, is at the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health. It was a generational bill passed in 2016. Implementation was sputtering. I was assigned in the summer of 2017 to jumpstart and make the bill that had passed in the legislature an actual working program. And what I did is I got with the team, working with the legislature, working across agencies, working with the judiciary. I was able to get the time that it takes for someone who is justice involved to receive services ordered by the courts for mental illness or substance use disorders, take it from 60 to 120 days down to 15 to 25 days. And I did that in 90 days, receiving bipartisan accommodation. In the private sector, I'm an national award-winning IT leader, and Governor Hogan himself has said that I am the most qualified individual to succeed him as Maryland's next governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lashar. Next, we have Mr. Harding. What qualifies you to be governor?
As I mentioned in my opening statement, I've worked a variety of different jobs over the past few decades here in Maryland, including for Bethlehem Steel at Sparrows Point when it was there, a couple of different shipyards, and also briefly, I was even a taxi driver and did some home improvement work. And now for quite a while, working in data processing for the health department, Maryland Health Department. And working these different jobs gave me a lot of knowledge about the problems that working people face, various groups of working people. And that, I think, is one of the things that's most important for a governor to have, a knowledge of these kinds of problems that people face, how they think about things, and what can be done to help solve those problems. And so I think that is an important, that's a really important qualification for me to run for the governor of Maryland.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace, what makes you qualified to be governor?
As I mentioned in my opening, I have a total of 44 years of service in the public sector and 14 years doing legislative negotiations, drafting on Capitol Hill, working with Office of Management and Budget. So I understand how legislatures work. I can work with our legislature. I was raised in a Republican household and was a Democrat for 30 years and then moved over to the Green Party about 15 years ago. So I've had experience with all the parties and respect, not with the Libertarians or working class yet, but I really look forward to, and I think I have a very good basis for creating a team approach to these huge challenges. We've kind of got two World War IIIs on our plate right now. One is the climate emergency, and second is our social and civil breakdown in terms of the violence in our streets, including violence against women as kind of off the streets, and then of course the horrific crime rates we have and incarceration rates and all of the suffering that's going on in the prison system. I have for 35 years been aware and been active on climate change, and I've been researching and implementing solutions on climate change. I have represented the United States on State Department delegations. I've traveled around the world, been to 33 countries. I speak Spanish. I can communicate with our Latino voters. And I have biological, technical, and public policy expertise. And most importantly, I have a vision for taking us to a positive, caring, connected society that has decentralized power, focusing on neighborhoods and a human-oriented and human-sized just sustainable future. There's so many solutions to all of our challenges in Maryland, and we have so many assets with which to tackle them that I think I have a very open mind and a creative and welcoming approach to bringing everybody to the table to solve those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Cox, what makes you qualified to be governor?
Well, thank you. And, you know, besides the fact that I am honored and blessed to have a family that has taught me many things, I think the first qualification that any public official must understand is that the only reason the office of governor exists, or any civil office, is because of this document right here, the Maryland Constitution. And unless you're familiar with the Maryland Constitution and have sworn an oath to it, you cannot be the governor of Maryland. This Constitution is a compact, and the powers derived therefrom are the express powers and the only powers of the governor. For the last 2 years, we have seen the Constitution of Maryland trampled upon in many ways, particularly with the CDC trying to impose its mandates into Maryland apart from law. And anyone who seeks the office of governor, who believes that that is in their power, for instance, to have the governor decide my family's health care rather than my family decide its own health care, is absolutely unqualified for governor. And unfortunately, Mr. Lashar, for instance, is one of those individuals who does not qualify because of his positions in that regard. And I would just refer to the fact that the executive department in this document is very clearly a sworn statement and oath that requires the governor to uphold the law of the land. And that includes the first and foremost law, the rights and responsibilities under the Constitution. And under Article 44, the Constitution may never be suspended. It may never be set aside, either for wartime, for a plea of necessity, or for any plea whatsoever. And as state delegate, I have upheld the Constitution in my oath. And as governor, I pledge to do the same to protect the civil rights, just as for 17 years I have fought for the civil rights of all Marylanders. I will do so as governor.
Thank you. Josh will take care of the next question.
Thank you. We'll begin with.
Before we do so,
with
may I
yeah.
make having been called out, may I make a quick rebuttal, please?
Please do. Yes, 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Mr. Lash.
Thank you. So Mr. Cox seems to have received poor briefing materials from his staff on regard to mandates and emergency powers. There is actually not much difference between Mr. Cox's positions and my own. In fact, I got into this race in November of 2020, believing that Governor Hogan was not giving us the leadership in returning to normalcy that we needed at that time, when the data was clear that only those over 60 or suffering comorbidities were at dire risk, at mortal risk of
Thank
COVID.
you.
We should have been, and so more on that later, but I wanted to set that record straight. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. For this question, we'll begin with Mr. Harding and then go through the list. This is a question about the economy. What's your view of the state of Maryland's economy right now? And as governor, what are your economic goals? Mr. Harding. Mr. Harding, are you with us?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The problem is that the economy of this whole country is organized to push more and more money into the pockets of corporate America and its bankers and the wealthy people who own those banks and corporations. The economy is not organized to provide what most of us need: affordable housing, affordable and reliable transportation, food, and gas prices that don't completely drain our paychecks. Politicians of both of the major parties give tax breaks and all kinds of subsidies that benefit those at the top, while they claim there was no money for repairing the roads, sewers, water systems, bridges, courts, and so forth. To the extent that the majority, the working people, have money to spend, that's what helps small businesses prosper.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace, your view of the Maryland economy and your economic priorities if you're elected?
I think we have some unfortunate situations in our economy right now, and I will start with a statement that's several decades old, but I hope will, I know still rings true, which is the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And while we may have fairly low unemployment in parts of the state right now, it's very uneven. We have some very high unemployment in some areas. And most importantly, we have a government and an entire economic system that is using a very odd measure of gross domestic product, or the state's GNP, which is focused on a growth economy, and it doesn't focus on the quality of life. It doesn't focus on our the strengths such as our youth, our disposable time, our family time, et cetera. So what I would do, and the goal I would have, is to move us towards, as I said in the beginning, the human, local, decentralized system. For instance, Baltimore has its own currency, focusing on small businesses, neighborhoods, urban farming, producing our own services as close to the neighborhoods as possible, working with unions to renovate the 15,000 abandoned houses, for instance, in Baltimore, and some of them renovated not into housing, but actually into urban greenhouses. There's a huge food production potential throughout our state to help directly if we've done that, if we do that. Chicago and New York City are doing that. But I'd like to use the United Nations Human Development Index to measure our quality of life and our economic goals. And most importantly, we need to switch to the green energy and organic agriculture. People are beginning to understand how important getting rid of toxics is throughout our system. It hurts the babies and pregnant women, and I will make that an absolute top priority. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Delegate Cox.
Well, I'm going to start by agreeing that we need to localize our agriculture and boost our farmers. We just celebrated National Farming Day, and it is essential. It's always been my focus to boost all of our farmers, and in particular to ensure that access to healthy, non-chemically based growing options, and particularly options for all of our communities to have their own food sources that are natural is something that I support. And I think that when you look at the economy as a whole, one of the primary issues that we're dealing with right now is accessing food at a reasonable price. I mean, the inflation is outrageous, and the economy is struggling. And my opponent, Mr. Moore, stands with the Washington, D.C. leadership that's failing on this issue, and instead passing an increase in taxes right now. That's abhorrent. I will reduce taxes. So my plan is very clear. I just posted it. Again, we have a very clear economic plan that will reduce our senior taxes so we can have seniors stay in Maryland. We will immediately order the Department of Taxation and Assessments to produce a constant dollar assessment valuation approach so that all of our property values go down, including all of the wrong redlining results from Baltimore City that has double the taxation rate for their properties. We have to get a handle on this, and I'm going to work with local leadership across all jurisdictions to bring those property rates down, property tax rates down. And thirdly, we need to make sure that our business taxes are reduced, because that's where the jobs come from. We've had a 50% loss in our small business jobs, and we need to boost that back by reducing those taxes. We can do this. Delaware does it, 5.5% rate. We shouldn't have an 8.25% rate. That's not smart. We're smarter than that. And so with working across the aisle, we'll get it done.
Thank you. Last for this question, Mr. Lashar.
Yeah, so the state of the economy and the goals that a Lashar administration would have, the state of the economy is unsettling. We have runaway debt, we've got inflation, we have recession brought to us by Republicans and Democrats alike from Washington, D.C. That's the circumstances that we face. What do we need to do about it? Well, we do have budget surpluses here in Maryland, and we have something called the Rainy Day Fund. So instead of spending or splurging the unexpected windfalls that we have that are largely coming from Washington, D.C., we need to put very large portions of that money aside into the Rainy Day Fund. I would say 65 to 75%. I would use some of that money from the budget surpluses to address the problem of vacant homes in Baltimore, and also to promote east-west transit in Baltimore City. The other thing that we need to do is provide relief to lower and middle income individuals who are feeling the bite of inflation. How can we do so at the state level? We need to roll back the taxes that fall heaviest on low income and middle income people. Which taxes are those? One is the gas tax, of course. We need to lower it. I would suspend it. We need to remove the so-called indexing that makes the gas tax rise with inflation. That cannot happen. We need votes so that the legislature is accountable for increases in taxes upon Marylanders. We do need to relieve or suspend taxes on retirees and for small businesses as well. We are 45th out of 50 states. Lastly, for small businesses, Wes Moore has it totally wrong. We cannot just raise the minimum wage and peg it to inflation. Nothing could be more devastating to small businesses in the state going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Len, back to you.
Hey, this next question is about public education, and we'll start with Ms. Wallace. Do you support the blueprint for Maryland's future? And will you ensure that the funding promised in the legislation in the out years will be provided?
Yes, I do support the blueprint. And as governor, since we have this unique situation in Maryland where the governor sets the budget originally and the legislature can only increase it, I can deliver on that commitment. It's more than a promise. I will, in addition, also start what I can do as governor to transition the early education programs to Montessori. They have been shown very clearly in scientific studies that the Montessori approach in kindergarten and early years produces children who are eager to learn, curious, and helps with emotional healing as well. I will also support academies, training centers within each high school so that students can start to earn money in the real world and get apprenticeships, not just the current coursework where you can study theoretically what other trades are, but with curriculums developed with unions, with business, and with our local service sectors, our firefighters and our schools, so that they can be real training and keep our young people interested. And that does not mean not going to college. The Green Party has always been supportive and absolutely committed to 100% free college education. This is provided in Europe by our other developed countries, and we will provide that here in Maryland. I think there's a great deal of wisdom and vision in the blueprint. I'm particularly delighted about the full funding for teachers' assistants, which will make the student-teacher ratio one where the students can get the attention they need in the schools. And I think it's excellent. I really look forward to shifting the whole culture to one of positive excitement about what we can do with our education, particularly bringing up these students, young people coming up with the Montessori method. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cox, do you support the blueprint for Maryland's future, that's the education program? And will you ensure that funding promised in the legislation in the out years will be provided?
So I have the unique opportunity to run for governor as being the only candidate on the ticket who actually worked on the bill and was able to review. It's about 170 pages and discovered in the process that there were many inequities in the bill, one of which would have a disparate impact on teachers of color. The African-American community and other minorities would have to raise their credentials at a rate that would be difficult. So we worked through that aspect and improved that part of the bill. We also worked through the aspect of the fact that the accountability and administrative board, the accountability board, that's part of this whole structure, had an executive appointment board that had the power to withhold funds from any school it determined. And so I worked hard to stop that procedure because it was unaccountable. And obviously the teachers unions and the localities of all the jurisdictions of Maryland agreed, and they joined in. They made comments about how they were appreciative of our work to fix that. The problem going forward is I believe strongly in supporting our teachers and in funding the implementation to the classroom, but I do not support the behemoth structure that involves still at this very moment a disparate impact on minority teachers at the same time excluding parents from education. And so what they have is that now a procedure that instead of just the State Board of Education, the parental rights and those with IEPs issues have to not only appeal up through the state board, but now the accountability board has a say. So as governor, I will appoint individuals and in terms of executing and supporting the blueprint. I will appoint parents and professionals who value parental rights to implement the plan. And yes, we will fund it, but we will make sure that school choice is part of it every step of the way. And we can do this just as other states have done it successfully.
Thank you. Mr. Lashar, do you support the blueprint for Maryland's future? And will you ensure the funding promised in the legislation in the out years will be provided?
For the blueprint, what we need to do is apply healthy skepticism that has been generally missing in the public conversation about the blueprint, which was brought to us by the so-called Kerwin Commission. The Kerwin Commission was 25 individuals, 24 of whom were either elected officials or key stakeholders and leaders in the existing educational system that is failing Maryland and Baltimore most especially. So what do we need to do? What was missing? What was missing was any notion that we should do something other than pour vastly more money into the system we already have that is already delivering abysmal results. You look at Baltimore City from a study 5 years ago, the bottom 50% of the high schools, 3,800 students. Of 3,800 students, 14 out of 3,800 proficient in math and reading. That's unconscionable. To pour more money into a system that is delivering those kinds of results is not what we can be doing. So what should we be doing? We need to introduce choice. We need to introduce an element of choice so that K through 12 education begins to look more like college and university education, a mix of public and private options for students, their parents, and teachers themselves for their own careers. If we don't have choice, we're not going to obtain accountability. And so without accountability, we're not going to achieve excellence. So yes, support moving forward, but we need more innovation and the money needs to follow the child. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Harding, do you support the blueprint for Maryland's future? And will you ensure that funding promised in the legislation in the out years will be provided?
I want to start with some really basic things here. In Maryland, we need school buildings that don't have leaky roofs and have heating equipment in the winter that functions properly and cooling in the summer that functions properly so that classes can actually take place. We need more teachers so that class sizes are small enough in every school so that children can get a decent education. The problem in both this state and throughout the country is that billions of dollars get siphoned off, for one example, to the military. And schools and public services have never gotten the funding they need. School systems in this country and in this state provide a better education generally to children in wealthier families and a poorer education to children of the working class majority, whether it's in the cities or in rural areas. What we really need is a national system funded from the wealth of billionaires who have been getting richer and richer and richer, while the rest of us have not been. A national system that makes a good education available to all children, not just the children of the wealthy.
Thank you. And back to you, Josh.
Thank you. This is a tax question. Some of you have talked a little bit about taxes, but we'll address it a little further here. We'll start with Delegate Cox. Are Maryland state taxes too low, too high, or about right? Are changes needed in the tax system? And if so, what are they? Delegate Cox, start with you.
Thank you. Yes, they are too high. And, you know, when I think about how I got pulled into politics when I was a kid because of my grandmother, And she was very eager to try to help Maryland have a better tax structure that would serve the people well and would not be burdensome. And to see where we are today, there's been some improvements, but overall, as others have mentioned, we're really still trending towards the bottom of all states in the tax burden policy that we have. In fact, when you look at the corporate structure, we're not attracting jobs here like we should for several reasons. First of all, our income tax structure is one of the highest in the country. It's the top marginal rate is 8.95%. That puts us at 44th in the nation. Our domestic migration, therefore, people moving out, the net loss has been about 250,000 people, Marylanders, net over the last 9 years. Governor Hogan has done well to stand against the tide of the last administration with the 42 tax increases, but we need to do more, and we can do more because everybody understands that we're in a situation right now that's desperate, and we cannot have the fuel tax continue as it has. We have to remove the CPI indexing. We have to take the inflationary tax connection out of the tax code. We need to make sure that our seniors can retire here and that our kids and our grandkids can grow up here. So that's the focus that I have, to lower and even seek to eliminate income tax for individuals. We can do that. Florida does it, and they have a $22 billion surplus, and we can fund it because the business income that is there is strong in Maryland, and because the federal system will remain strong here. So I intend to work hard as my top priority.
Thank you. Mr. Lashar, you're up next.
We have too many taxes that are too high. And Governor Hogan, as maybe his top achievement, did hold the line on taxes for all Marylanders in our economy. And if Wes Moore is elected, there's going to be nobody holding the line against the General Assembly. We will go back to the days that Mr. Cox just referenced of Governor O'Malley, in which there was never a tax that wasn't embraced and implemented. If you look at Mr. Moore's primary statement on the economy, it's called Wealth, Wages. It's called Work, Wages, and Wealth. It's about 12 pages of all the different programs that he's going to launch, trying to stimulate the government, stimulate the economy with government programs, but he doesn't explain how he's going to pay for any of it. So what we need is fiscal responsibility. We need lower taxes to bring in investment. We need lower taxes to keep individuals and businesses in Maryland. Related to taxes, for those middle income earners who do pay income tax, we need to expand the standard deduction. And finally, we, as not just a matter of economic vigor, but also as a matter of social justice, we need to take an approach to reparations for the Black community that is based on extending tax credits, tax breaks for those in the Black community who are descendants of the formerly enslaved, who are buying new houses, starting new business, or passing on their wealth. That would be another key element of my tax policy for Maryland. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, you're up next.
I think the taxes are both too high and too low. Taxes are too high on ordinary people. Taxes are too low on the richest people. And therefore, many things, the funding isn't there for them because the wealthiest people aren't paying hardly any taxes. In some cases, almost none or none, actually, some of the wealthiest people. And it's not just Maryland taxes, but federal taxes too.
Thank you. Mrs. Wallace?
I'll take the position that's not been stated so far. I think the taxes generally are all right now. The point is that we're not getting what we need from the taxes. What we need to be doing right now is a massive transformation of our economy, our agriculture, and our living patterns to bring us to sustainability and to not just reduce future emissions, which is the Democratic approach generally from local to federal, but in fact, we have to reverse our CO2 and we need to absorb it. We are beautifully positioned in Maryland right now to do that because we have a large agriculture which can become organic, which absorbs carbon and nitrogen oxides. We have the Chesapeake Bay, which can be a huge absorber of carbon also. And of course, we have the reforestation that can occur on all of our public lands. So the point, I think, is not the financial percents here and there. It's the fact that we do not have a just, sustainable, abundant, and equitable society right now. That will be my focus, is the solutions. And I have continuously looked throughout the country and the world for best practices on all of the new methods and ways that we need to live together in order to tackle climate change. That is the organizing principle that needs to be certainly of my administration, and I believe of our society in general. We need to keep the fuel tax and indexing because the really important thing is to just simply move away from gas. And I will facilitate that move with the rainy day fund. It is an emergency. We've already lost a lot of land in Dorchester County, for instance, to climate change and sea rise in the Chesapeake Bay. We have lost people here in Maryland from the tornadoes and floods. We have to use our minds to imagine what's really going on, what the scientists are telling us, and orient our spending and our patterns to that reality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Len?
Yes, this question will start with Mr. Lashar. The General Assembly passed legislation this year to protect abortion rights and expand the number of healthcare professionals who can provide abortion care. What are your views on this legislation?
When it comes to choice, I'm all choice all the time, beginning of life, end of life, the school you go to, the marriage, the person you marry. So the bill that was passed by the legislature, I support it. I feel that abortion is a uniquely difficult question in terms of the challenges of rights and responsibilities that it poses. I emphasize that it is not just rights that we need to talk about, but it is also responsibilities when it comes to pregnancy and abortion. And those responsibilities do not belong just to a woman. There is another individual involved in any pregnancy, and that is the man. And any man who is not ready to shoulder his responsibilities for bringing a child for raising a child needs to live to his responsibilities when engaged in sexual activity. So I support longstanding Maryland law. I do not support either the model of Oklahoma, as I understand it, of no abortion, or the model of Colorado, as I understand it, of abortion still available until late in the pregnancy. I think that Maryland has it right. We need to continue these laws, and I am glad that we need not just to continue the laws, we need to depoliticize the conversation. We have to take the demonization out of it, and we have to recognize the strong feelings that everybody on either side or any side of this debate have. I think that is imperative for this issue and others that our nation faces at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Harding, would you like the question again, or?
No, I can just give the answer.
Expanding the number of healthcare.
Yeah. I think abortion is a decision that has to be made between a woman and her doctor. I'm opposed to attempts to control women's bodies for the government to, or anybody to. They should have control of their own bodies. And I think that the whole question of abortion has been part of, or become part of, an attack on one side on women's rights in general. So again, I think abortion is a decision that has to be made between a woman and her doctor.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace?
I strongly support, and the Green Party strongly supports, the right of a woman to choose whether to carry a pregnancy or not. And this applies to women without resources. It applies to women coming into Maryland from other jurisdictions. And I strongly support the legislation that was passed. And I'm very proud that Maryland has been a leader on this issue. And I was friends with the family, the wife of which was in the state legislature and led this progress 30 years ago. It leads to a larger issue of bodily autonomy, and I'd like to just take this opportunity to talk about issues of women. Maryland is a sex trafficking hub with Baltimore Washington Airport and I-95 going from Washington to New York. And this is an issue which has been ignored in terms of public policy under both Republican and Democratic administrations. We need to be much more active. We can do a lot more in terms of public education, public awareness, to stop the women are trafficked up, particularly to New York City, where they are kept in slavery for years, imprisoned and raped many times a day. It's hell. And Maryland is part of the transit line for that. It brings up also the issue of men's contraception, and I agree very much with Mr. Lashar in terms of the responsibility part, but I've been very active in that. I helped start a nonprofit corporation to raise funding to bring men's contraception to market, non-hormonal, safe, reversible contraception. I believe men have an equal human right to decide their own reproductive futures, and that also men should be partners, active partners in the reproductive decisions of a couple, particularly when women, for instance, cannot tolerate the mainly hormonal contraceptives. The men can handle that in a relationship. So there's a great deal more we can do. I'm proud of what we've done so far, and I look forward to bringing this, really breaking new ground on this area. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Cox, this question.
So I agree with Ms. Wallace on the issue of sex trafficking. Maryland is a hub, and I have passed legislation, unlike some in the different across the aisle. We have, unlike some misperceptions, we have worked across the aisle to eradicate sex trafficking in Maryland. I passed a bill about this, forcing or requiring the state to post the hotline. But I want to address the issue, the question, and that is the legislation that was put forth this past year. In specific, let me outline it quickly because my colleagues may not have heard of each of these things. But number one, it provides $3.5 million a year for abortion doctors through the late term. We are a late term abortion state. There are two of them here up to the moment of birth. And that money is your tax dollars going to pay for that. That was what was passed this year. Number two, the cap in the budget, which used to be 10 million for Medicaid abortions for anyone, including anybody flying in for abortion tourism, was eliminated. So now there's no cap on taxpayer money. That's yours and my money being used for anyone from any state, and including potentially internationally. So we are now, according to the Baltimore Sun, an abortion tourism state. Now, thirdly, there was a infanticide bill where a baby would be allowed to die within up to the 28th day after birth. That bill became very, very controversial on the House floor as well as the Senate floor. There was incredible amounts of debate back and forth, and the Democrat Party withdrew the bill. It was killed. The bill was killed. Those were the pieces of legislation this year, along with an amendment to the Constitution, which was also killed. I stood against those because they were extreme, just like my opponent, Mr. Moore. He supports those. My position is much more moderate, supporting life because it's the baby's life that matters as well as the mom's, and I support both of them entirely.
Thank you. And we're going back to Josh now.
Thank you. We'll start with Mr. Harding here. What policies will you pursue to improve the public health system in Maryland?
We need a national health care system for everyone. We have now a patchwork kind of system that leaves many people with either insufficient medical care or basically none at all. The problem is that the way the healthcare is organized today, it's done to maximize the profits of healthcare companies. We need a comprehensive national healthcare system that will provide good healthcare to every single person in the country, regardless of their ability to pay. The lack of a good public health system meant during the pandemic that many people could not get the care they needed. COVID spread, and in this country alone, as I said earlier, over 1 million people died from it.
Thank you, Ms. Wallace.
We support a universal healthcare system. As Mr. Harding said, the current Obamacare, so to speak, is fundamentally, it forced everyone into the private commercial health insurance industry instead of truly providing a single payer universal health care. But my focus on health would not just be to take care of you after you were sick, but the real point is to not get sick in the first place. It's to build health. And a major part of my administration will be tackling the cleaning up of Maryland from the toxics. My lieutenant governor candidate, Pat Elder, is a national expert on PFAS and these toxic, PFAS meaning the forever chemicals that are currently not generally regulated even by EPA. They're not filtered out by our water treatment systems, and yet they hurt the development of babies' brains during pregnancy and the early years, and they cause cancer. So I will be providing on day one, and this is on my website, wallaceforgovernor.us, I will be providing from that rainy day fund emergency reverse osmosis water filters for every household with a breastfeeding mother or mother preparing infant formula. We've got to get healthy. And that means that we get rid of the toxics. Cancer doesn't just happen by itself. And with 1 out of every 8 American children now with neurodevelopmental damage, we have an epidemic of disease in our children that is not being dealt with by the national media or the 2 pre-Civil War parties. So my focus is on health. And I think with that, plus the healthcare system, we will do much better, particularly also, as I said, with men's contraceptive. Hopefully we will get it to market. There are 6 different technologies currently being researched so that we will be able to help families focus on their raising their children when they're ready, and that will overall have a better outcome for the population. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Delegate Cox, what will you do to improve the state's public health system?
So I introduced bills in the legislature for CAM for veterans, that's complementary and alternative medical treatment, to provide alternative medicine options. I believe in that, and that gained a lot of traction and support, even from the from both sides of the aisle in the Maryland Veterans Association or Department of Veterans. I believe that we can expand that and help our 22 a day to stop the deaths, to make sure that we save lives. I additionally believe in open markets for everyone. So right now, the current healthcare insurance market is not open across state lines as it should be. Our mandates are so heavy that it's sometimes just simply impossible for some opt-ins. I believe in an opt-in. We can allow the law to work through allowing individual choice. And this goes to the heart of my policy, and that is to empower the individual and to put freedom back in your hands. We cannot continue like what happened during the lockdowns of COVID, where seniors were denied care because of quality of life decisions in hospitals. So I put a bill in the legislature to stop that practice, to mandate it. And in fact, it was supported, my bill was supported by both the hospital and nurses, as well as even those who are not aligned politically with me. They put in letters of support because they understood that this was a civil rights issue. And so even the Maryland Civil Rights Commission supported my bill, which demonstrated the bipartisan strength of the bill. That's what I intend to do as governor, because we have to make sure that individuals have the options that they need to make their choices and not the government. To do that, you cannot have a centralized control system for health insurance. So you have to empower the individual to go out, make them empowered to decide their own care through their own insurance purchase, all the way through their own decisions in the hospital and with their doctors. That's what I will do. I will never lock us down or force mandates, and we will once again have a much freer healthcare system.
Thank you. Mr. Lashar.
Public health in Maryland is actually pretty good. It's in the literature amongst experts recognized as a good system. Why, and a model to the rest of the country. Why is that? It's because we have something that goes back to Senator Mikulski decades ago, and it is currently called the total cost of care model with the primary care dimension to it. Now that's a lot of jargon, but why is this important? We have, from Senator Mikulski, going back decades, we have what's called a waiver with the federal government that allows us in Maryland to run our system a little bit differently than the other 49 states. We need to keep it that way. Our system is patient-centered, it is outcome-oriented, and it is cost-controlled. What do we need to do? This waiver needs to be renewed next year, 2023, and ought to be the #1 priority of our next Maryland governor. Two other things that I'm passionate about in public health are, one, behavioral health. On the behavioral health side, we need to expand services, but more important, we need to do better with what we've already got. We need to integrate behavioral health services, mental illness, substance use disorders, with primary care. For those people who are suffering addiction, who have mental illness, the earlier you can start to engage those people, treat them, the better the outcomes for the individual and the lower the cost to the system. So integrated behavioral health care with primary care is important. And then another issue goes to what both my friend Nancy Wallace and Mr. Cox have said, the trafficking. Because of the sex trafficking, we have newborns in Baltimore City, in Maryland, who are US citizens who are not getting prenatal care. We need to make sure that regardless of your citizenship status, how you got here, that you are eligible as a pregnant woman to receive prenatal care. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Len.
And in this round of questions, we'll start with Nancy Wallace. What is the governor's role in addressing crime, and what would you do about the conditions that lead to crime?
The easiest step to take to change the dynamic in the most affected areas is my commitment to a mass pardon, and more than an expungement, actually is called a vacatur of records for marijuana and cannabis. The fact that the Republican and Democratic parties have been in charge at the federal level for 50 years with a completely erroneous scientific classification of cannabis as a class 1 drug in the FDA system, and has let that ruin hundreds of thousands of lives and families, is unconscionable. And I hope that the voters will realize that these parties must be accountable for their lack, they're allowing these dangers and these harms to continue. What the governor can do is, as I mentioned, simply take that away. And then I'd like to follow the New York City best model, which I consider a best practice right now, which is that they're providing preference in small business loans to people who have been convicted and incarcerated for marijuana. So I think turning that around, as you say, making lemonade out of lemons and helping people back onto the path of control and a solid income and small business is the way to go there. A woman attorney general of New Jersey has created a very successful model in Camden, which is an extremely violent, crime-ridden city, and they reimagined their police department, their policing effort, and that's reduced murders by 40%. And then a woman Green Party mayor of Richmond, California, introduced something called life mapping, with working directly with the most at-risk violent offenders, and that reduced murder 70%. So we have a lot of best practices and solutions, and I will bring those to Maryland. Thank you.
And next we have Mr. Cox. What is the governor's role in addressing crime, and what will you do about the conditions that lead to crime?
The governor's role is outlined in the Constitution of Maryland, and it states this: to enforce the execution of the laws, to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And right now, at this moment, we have in the city of Baltimore, for instance, this is just one issue. Tonight on the news, 3 people wounded after a shooting near the dollar store in Cherry Hill. Number 2, a 15-year-old boy charged with killing a man outside the Columbia apartment complex. Number 3, captured. A man that was wanted in connection with human trafficking is in custody. Number 4, Maryland drivers fired up, and Baltimore County Police seeking the cell phone video in a killing of the high school football player. And I could go on and on with a daily report. You can go to the governor's crime statistics on the governor's website, and you can see these in a daily fashion. There's a publication of the data. This is a crisis beyond belief. 1,309 fentanyl deaths because of the open border crisis, trafficking the drugs and humans into our state. That's 1,309. Can you imagine if we had a mass shooting of 1,309 citizens, and yet that's how many were killed, were murdered right now, just with fentanyl in the last year. We are seeing shootings go up, 300 deaths right now this year. Again, we're on target to once again exceed one of the worst cities in the world for crime. I'm going to get control of this by immediate action and enforcing the laws. We're going to bring all the parties to the table and say, we are going to take charge of the crime and eliminate the cartels on day one. We're moving forward. And that includes aggressive action with policing, funding the police, even including all of the localities to make sure that they have the training and funding that necessary, and to stop the constant war on police. This is a crisis, and I intend to solve it so that we're once again safe in Maryland.
Mr. Lashar on crime.
Thank you. I agree with with Ms. Wallace about amnesty and expungement, but that's backwards looking, right? That's addressing an injustice that has arisen from the disproportionate impact of the war on drugs on the Black community. Let's do that. But what do we need to do going forward to reduce crime? I submit 2 things. One, we need realism on crime, right? We need to understand what its sources are and what isn't going to make a difference. Gun control is not going to make a difference in reducing crime. More jail time for those convicted in the courts is not going to reduce the crime. What will? There is one action and one action only that will allow us to strike meaningfully at the incidence of crime, violent crime, homicides, and that action is to bring the failed war on drugs to an end. We need to remove the black market that exists in the drug trade so that it's no longer the gangsters and the traffickers that run the streets of Baltimore, so that it's no longer rational for young children in Baltimore, the corner kids. So it's no longer rational for them to choose that life instead of a life of deferment and looking at school and choosing not to succumb to the temptations, the financial temptations of that lifestyle. 85% of violent crimes are related to the drug trade. And also we have to restore trust and respect for the law everywhere. The community and law enforcement need to come together. And as governor, I would facilitate that community-based policing, transparency for the police. And we do need to ask the state's attorney to enforce the laws that are on the books. If we don't like those laws, let's work together to change them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Harding on crime.
First of all, I'd like to say that Maryland needs to stop putting innocent people in jail. There was obviously a very well-publicized case of this recently, but there are many other innocent people that are in jail who haven't been where the situation that they were caught in hasn't been exposed. Unemployment, inflation, closing many rec centers, low pay, have created social conditions that contribute to crime. One offshoot is the enormous illegal drug industry that adds to incarceration rates and violent deaths. Crime will decrease when social conditions are improved. We talk about crimes of a lot of young people who have been pushed to the edge of society, but we often ignore the criminality at the top of society. Not just a few wealthy people, not just a few politicians, but the criminality of allowing corporations to dictate who has a job, who has decent pay and benefits, and what air, water, and land will be ruined by their decisions.
Thank you. And now back to Josh. It looks like we have maybe 2 or 3 more questions left, right?
Well, yeah, I'm actually trying to figure out the timing here a little bit. I think this may actually have to be our last question before we get to closing statements. We had prepared 15 questions and we're sadly just about to cross the halfway mark, but I think in the interest of time, we'll have to make this the last question before closing statements. And fittingly, a couple of you have touched on this some, but let's explore it a little further. This is a environment and climate change question. It goes first to Delegate Cox. What do you see as Maryland's greatest climate challenges and how will you address them? Delegate Cox.
I think the need for energy is number one, because as we see at the pump every day, Marylanders are hurting. And the response of my opponent, Mr. Moore, is to not only double down on the current moratorium that we have on oil and gas in Maryland, but also to focus on his running mate's 2035 plan that she helped co-sponsor originally to take away our gasoline cars and trucks entirely, which would be ludicrous. It would crush our economy and the local individual who simply needs to put bread on the table, and they can hardly do it now with the inflation. And so I think we need to have a smart all the above approach to make sure that we have clean energy. For instance, the new nuclear approach is something that is widely used in countries across the Western hemisphere and in Europe. They're small modular reactors that are safe. and they're 100% clean energy, and they will boost our energy supply and our electric grid. I think we also need to look at the fact that we're smart enough to use oil and gas in an appropriate manner. We have one of the largest shoals on the East Coast. Some have estimated that it actually challenges Saudi Arabia's amount in our Marcellus Shoal. We can access that as smart, carefully done people, and we can't sit around and deny the opportunities for Marylanders to have the access to that clean gas. Once again, we're talking about some of the cleanest energy that exists on the earth. That's very powerful. So I will expand those options. That will provide opportunities for Marylanders, an economic boost, an increase in our energy supplies. And I will also focus on the Bay. Right now, effluent pours by the millions of gallons. And as an elected town council official, I stopped effluent into the Bay without raising taxes. And I intend to make that a priority in my administration as your governor, unlike my opponent.
Thanks, Delegate. Mr. Lashar.
The greatest challenge is not to succumb to panic. Climate change is real. Human-induced climate change is real. How did I come to that conclusion? By reading the science reports, the so-called assessment reports from the UN Climate Panel itself. What is not often reported is that that science presents 5 different scenarios for where we go from here to 2100, which is the endpoint of the forecast. And the middle scenario is a reasonable scenario if we take determined action now and don't overreact. So what do I mean? We need an energy portfolio that is reliable and affordable as well as clean. We need to include not just modern nuclear modular power that Mr. Cox was referring to, but we need to recognize that low emission fossil fuels, at least in the transition period, are better than high emission fossil fuels. So that should be an option that we consider as well. The key is a diversified energy portfolio where we let innovators bring new technologies, new options to market, and we let consumers, whether individuals or businesses or government agencies, choose which is best for them. So market driven. Second, we need to implement the bill that was passed earlier this year in the legislature, the climate bill for that went through the assembly, excessive in my estimation, but as governor, I would execute it with an eye towards unintended consequences that we might need to mitigate going forward, especially around natural gas mandates. And finally, I agree with Mr. Cox. Effluence into the Bay is a top priority. The only thing that I would add to his idea is that we need to address Pennsylvania's fertilizer runoff into the Susquehanna that makes it into the Bay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harding on climate.
Again, I'd like to go back to the fundamental problem. The big corporations and agribusinesses, they want to do in relationship to dumping of pollution of various sorts that messes up both the environment and the climate. They want to do what's cheapest and therefore most profitable for them. And they've done a lot of it. So today, it's true. With the climate, we find ourselves in a situation that in the long run could threaten life as we know it on this planet. And we need to have a change so that land and manufacturing and other production facilities are run in a way that's environmentally responsible. And working people, that's in their interest to do that. as well as for all humanity.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace?
When I decided to enter the race this year, I looked back at my positions on my 2016 website when I ran for Congress. And unfortunately, everything I called for then is still valid now and basically has not been implemented. The most important challenge is for us to realize the scope of the catastrophe that we are causing right now, and that there's 230 years of emissions in the atmosphere already. So reducing the emissions is not enough. My position and that of the party is clearly that we need to move off of gas and all fossil fuels immediately as an emergency. This would involve a transition and transformation. It's not just, though, energy per se. We know the green energy sources are wonderful sources of jobs. The Green New Deal was created by the Green Party 12 years ago, came onto the political scene with our politicians, our candidates. And it's not just maybe right now. The Greenland ice sheet is melting twice as fast as the models of the International Panel on Climate Change predicted. Antarctic ice shield is melting 6 times as fast. We don't have time. It is an emergency, and I will declare the climate emergency. Montgomery County has already done that, and I will take it up to the state level. Our habits and the lack of the media and the government communicating and understanding the seriousness of this issue to the public is one of our main problems. Right now, the public, even the children are leading us right now. And as they say, where the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. So our habits and the lack of imagination and expertise by political leaders is a major challenge. Moving down to the specific level, I would like to do what President Roosevelt did with the wartime mobilization in World War II, which is he pulled together stakeholders from each subsector of the economy, the entire economy, not just energy, and they come up with the means to meet our negative carbon, not just reducing, but negative carbon goals for each subsector. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And incredibly, we've reached the point now where we're going to ask each of the candidates to make a 2-minute closing statement. We start with the Libertarian, Mr. Lashar.
Thank you, Josh. My proposition is simple. If you're happy with what you've been seeing and getting from the Republicans and Democrats for these last 10 or 20 years, then vote for them. Wes is an epitome. Wes Moore is an epitome of the modern Democratic Party. Dan Cox is an epitome of the modern Republican Party. So if that's what you want, vote for them. But if not, consider me. Frankly, consider Nancy. Consider David. I myself am standing with Christiana as a principled, accomplished, and civil alternative to what we have been seeing and getting. And if you want change, you can't vote for Wes Moore. Wes Moore is beholden to the Democratic Party machine that has failed Maryland, but Baltimore most especially. He's beholden to the teachers' unions that have been delivering abysmal results and reject any choice within our school systems. And he's beholden to the money from Wall Street and Hollywood that has fueled his campaign, money that doesn't care about Maryland, doesn't have an interest or stake in Maryland's future. So if you want different, then please think about voting for a third party for the first time in your life. Vote for me, David Lashar, along with my running mate, Christiana Logan-Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, 2 minutes.
If working people were in charge today politically, we would have much different priorities from what we see. We would organize things differently. We would be more transparent than what we see. Like with problems in the water and sewer departments, or with environmental certificates that don't get updated. But I want to say that we are trying to build a working class party because nothing's going to change until working people take an active part. We organize. We make our own program. And we use our position in the economy and the power that gives us when we're organized together to change.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you again. I am so grateful to the sponsors tonight who included all of us. I think you've heard a wide range of opinions, and I hope it stimulates everybody to realize that representative democracy can do much better than the paralysis we've had with the past 50 to 70 years with the two pre-Civil War parties. The Green Party is about 20 years old in Maryland. We're almost half a century in Europe, where we're doing very well, and we're in 76 countries around the world. And I'm the only national party candidate here tonight and on the ballot whose party refuses to accept any money from corporations or PACs at any time. I will be kicked out of the party if I do so. So I think honesty combined with representative democracy and real science, like listening to the IPCC on climate change, will revitalize our leadership, our government. And also on my website, I have under the democracy and governance reform page, you'll see a very long detailed proposal for getting rid of seniority in the state legislature so that every citizen's representative has equal power to every other citizen's representative and continue to improve what real democracy means. I have infinite faith in the people and that we can manage and succeed and bloom with all of our challenges if we work together in good faith with no corruption, no corporate campaign contributions. I think Maryland needs a new attitude, and new ideas and new solutions, and a new spirit of caring and cooperation. And I would be so honored to be the first woman governor and to bring a different spirit. I will not call the other candidates in this race my opponent, for instance, and because we all need to work together. The challenges we face can be made to build our Maryland better and as a team and not competitive. So let's bring caring and true democracy and honesty back to Maryland and vote Nancy Wallace and Pat Elder. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Delegate Cox.
Thank you, Josh, and League of Women Voters of Maryland and everyone and my colleagues. I commend each of you for being here today and for your races as well. It is an honor to run. I am a political outsider in many respects because I have not only been a small businessman for 17 years and also a husband, father, and someone who grew up on a farm in a lower middle class. I have also worked across the aisle in the legislature, at times at odds with my own party. So this is not about party today. This is about what's best for Maryland. I am running to restore freedom in Maryland. In many respects, these are issues that are kitchen table issues that each one of us, and myself included, are impacted by. We're talking about lowering inflation immediately to make sure that we can afford our fuel and our groceries, to eliminate the fuel tax, to suspend that, to make sure we lower senior taxes and the retirement tax, to make sure that our first responders can stay here and not have to leave our state when they retire. These are issues that are in front of us to make sure that our workers are, those who are employees of businesses and as well as small businesses have lower taxes so they can actually stay here in Maryland. That's in front of us right now, but you can't accomplish that if you have crime raging and causing so much death and destruction as is happening. And I will be your voice to end the crime scourge in Maryland. And thirdly, I want to focus on education. Look, everybody that has kids and grandkids holds dear the future and opportunities that our children need and deserve. But we're not accomplishing that like we should in Maryland. And I will expand school choice to the Boost program across the whole state and make sure that our parents are involved again, to make sure that we never teach them indoctrination like the gender indoctrination, but instead focus on real learning. And that's going to empower them to build wealth and to build their families. That's the future of Maryland. That's the future that all of us need and desire. And that's the future that I promise you that I'll work for. And I'm humbly asking for your vote. You can go to coxforfreedom.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Delegate. So we've come to the end. First, thank you to the candidates for participating. Takes a lot to put yourself out there, and I think you all should be commended. It was a great discussion. Thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. Excuse me, a reminder that a YouTube video of the forum will be available in a few days, I think Monday probably, at the University of Baltimore Public Affairs YouTube page. So please spread the word and tell folks to watch there if they weren't able to tonight. A reminder too that the forum we did last week for candidates for comptroller is already up there on the YouTube page, as are the interviews that Len did earlier this week with the candidates for Attorney General. So really that's it. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the candidates, and don't forget to vote. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.